Hi everyone. In this lecture, I will start implementing Elastic Query Web Client. Let's start by creating a new module. As I always do, I will add the dependencies first. I need app-config data and Spring Boot Starter Web, and also Spring Cloud Starter Config, Spring Boot Starter Security, Lombok, and Spring Boot Starter Test dependencies. As a new dependency, I will also add Spring Boot Starter TimeLeaf and TimeLeaf's extras Spring Security 5. I will use these new dependencies to use TimeLeaf. And finally, I will add Spring Boot Starter Web Flux dependency to use Spring Web Client. Alright, now let's create Spring Boot Starter class, Elastic Query Web Client application. I will add Spring Boot application annotation and component scan annotation. And then in the main method, I will call Spring Application Run method, as I always do for the Spring Boot main classes. As you see, for the base packages of component scan, I use com microservices demo, as in the previous Spring Boot main classes. Then I will add application YAML configuration file under resources folder. I will also add Bootstrap YAML file to set the config server properties. I will set application name, profiles active, and cloud config name as I did previously in the Bootstrap YAML file. Again, here the profiles active should be the same name under the config server repository configuration file. Finally, I will also add a logback file here for customizing logging as usual. In the config server repository, I will now create an Elastic Query web config file and add Elastic Query Web Client with Web Client properties, connect timeout, read timeout, and write timeout. Also, I will add max in memory size to set the maximum memory that Web Client can use. Then I will add default content and accept types that this web client will use. And finally, the base URL that we want to connect from this web client. As you see, for the base URL, I use the Elastic Query Service URL with the documents path. Then I will set TimeLeaf property cache to false to allow TimeLeaf templates to be reloaded when they are changed during the development. Let's also enter the server port and context path using server servlet context path. For the port, here I use 8184. Finally, I also add user information here because we will need it for security configuration. You can copy them from the Elastic Query Service configuration file. I will simply set username, password, and roles under user-config property. Now I will go to app-config data module and add Elastic Query Web Client config data class, where I will define a nested web client class and set the properties there. I will use Elastic Query Web Client prefix for the configuration properties annotation here. In the nested web client class, I will create 4 integer values for connect timeout, read timeout, write timeout, and max in memory size, and 3 string values for content type, accept type, and base URL. Then I will create a property on the author class with this web client type. This is because I set the web client properties under web client config in the configuration file, which is a sub prefix under elasticquerywebclient prefix. So it requires an inner class here. Let's finally add the context load test at this moment, as we did for the other services. So I will create a class, elasticquerywebclient application test, under the test Java folder, and annotate this class with Spring Boot test annotation, and add a simple context load test method using test annotation. This will help me to create a Spring context when I run Maven install command, so I will be sure that there is no issue starting this Spring context in our application. Alright, I will see you in the next lecture to start creating the time leaf templates with Bootstrap.